A single father came to the aid of a woman who fainted on the street, unaware that she was his new boss. What began as kindness turned into an overwhelming passion. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you're watching from. The April morning in New York woke up grey and melancholic, with the sky heavy with dark clouds promising a torrential downpour. In Brooklyn, the streets still held that characteristic aroma of wet earth mixed with the coffee wafting from local cafes and the smell of exhaust from cars that were beginning to form the morning traffic. Jack Miller, a 38-year-old lawyer, was running down Aspicuelta Street with his 8-year-old daughter Emma. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled from the rush, and his furrowed brows revealed the constant tension of balancing a demanding career with the responsibility of being a single father. Emma, a clever girl with curious brown eyes, identical to her father's, and curly hair that bounced as she ran, was trying to keep up with his long strides. "Dad, can you walk slower? My backpack is heavy," Emma complained, adjusting the straps of her pink backpack that seemed disproportionate for her small frame. "Sorry, Princess, but you know Aunt Sarah gets mad when we're late for school," Jack replied, slightly slowing his pace while checking the watch on his wrist. "And I have that important meeting at the office today." The wind began to blow stronger, rustling the leaves of the trees lining the street. Jack could smell the rain approaching, that unmistakable scent that precedes New York storms. He quickened his pace, knowing that in a matter of minutes they would be soaked if they didn't find shelter. It was when they reached the front of the traditional local market in Brooklyn that everything changed. The establishment exuded the seductive aroma of freshly baked bagels, mixed with the scent of fresh fruits and cheeses wafting across the sidewalk. Jack was about to cross the street when he saw an elegant woman trip and faint on the wet pavement. She was tall, about 5'7", and wore a perfectly tailored grey blazer over a white silk blouse. Her blonde hair was styled in a sophisticated low bun, and even unconscious, there was a natural elegance in her delicate features. Her well-manicured hands with discreet nude polish were sprawled on the damp ground next to a brown leather briefcase that had opened, scattering papers everywhere. "Dad, that lady fell," Emma shouted, pointing at the fallen woman. Jack didn't hesitate for a second. All his training as a father had taught him to react quickly in emergencies, and his altruistic nature took precedence over the morning rush. He let go of Emma's hand and ran to the stranger, kneeling beside her on the cold, wet pavement. "Emma, hold the umbrella over us," he ordered, as he carefully checked the woman's breathing. His fingers found a regular pulse at her neck, which immediately reassured him. With precise movements, he placed her in the recovery position, turning her on her side to prevent choking in case she vomited. The rain began to fall, first as scattered drops, then more intensely. Emma obediently held the navy blue umbrella over them, forming a small shield against the storm that was starting. The drops escaping the umbrella mixed with the sweat of concern that was forming on Jack's forehead. "It's okay. You're safe," he murmured, even knowing she couldn't hear him. It was a habit he had developed with Emma when she was a baby, constantly talking to reassure both the child and himself. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, the woman began to stir slightly. Her green eyes opened slowly, first confused, then focusing on the worried face of the man helping her. They were intensely green, like emeralds, but there was something vulnerable in them that contrasted with the professional demeanor her appearance suggested. What happened?" she asked in a hoarse voice, trying to sit up. "Take it easy," Jack said gently, helping her sit against the wall of the market. "You fainted on the sidewalk. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, but you seem fine. How do you feel?" She ran her hand across her forehead, still dizzy. "I was in a hurry. I didn't have coffee this morning, and I think that's it." Jack took off his denim jacket, revealing a light blue dress shirt that fit well on his athletic physique, maintained by morning runs in Central Park. He carefully draped the jacket over her shoulders, shielding her from the rain that was now falling more heavily. "Emma, can you grab a bottle of water from inside the market? Tell them it's an emergency," he asked his daughter, handing her some bills. "Sure, Dad," the girl replied, running into the establishment with determination. "Your daughter?" the woman asked, watching Emma disappear through the market door. "Yes, Emma. 8 years old and smarter than her dad," Jack said with a genuine smile, the kind of smile that naturally appeared whenever he talked about his daughter. Emma quickly returned with a bottle of water and even a pack of cookies. "The guy at the market said sugar helps when someone faints," she explained, extending the items to the unknown woman. "Thank you so much," the woman said, taking small sips of water. Her hands were still trembling slightly. "You're both very kind." The aroma of fresh bagels continued to waft from the market, mixing with the smell of rain, washing the streets of Brooklyn. Jack noticed that she already had more color in her face and seemed more stable. "Do you want us to call an ambulance or someone from your family?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "No, no need. I'm feeling better already," she replied, trying to get up. Jack immediately supported her by the arm. Jack noticed that she was still a bit unsteady. "I have a very important meeting today. I can't be late." "Work is important too, but your health comes first," said Jack, with that straightforward honesty that was characteristic of his personality. "At least have a morning coffee before you go. There's an excellent bakery around the corner." She looked at him as if she wasn't used to such selfless kindness. "I need to go. Thank you so much. You saved my day." A taxi approached, and she waved to it. Before getting in, she turned one last time to Jack and Emma. "How can I thank you?" she asked, genuine gratitude in her voice. "No need to thank us. Just take better care of yourself, okay?" replied Jack, holding Emma's hand as the rain continued to fall around them. She got into the taxi, and Jack noticed a subtle jasmine perfume lingering in the air even after the vehicle disappeared into the morning traffic of New York. Emma looked at her father with that familiar expression of someone who had something to say. "Dad, you liked her, didn't you?" the girl asked, with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Emma, not every act of kindness means romantic interest. We just did what anyone would do." "But you kept watching the taxi until it disappeared," Emma insisted, smiling mischievously. "Come on, or you'll be late for school and I'll hear a lecture from Aunt Sarah," Jack deflected, but he knew that his daughter had noticed something he himself was reluctant to admit. As they walked toward the school under the now lightening rain, Jack couldn't shake the image of that woman's green eyes and the feeling that this casual encounter would mean more than he imagined. The scent of jasmine seemed to have stuck in his memory, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread and New York rain, a combination that unknowingly would become unforgettable in his life. 3 weeks after that chance meeting in the rain, Jack was at his desk in the law firm Smith & Associates, reviewing a real estate contract when his secretary, Carla, knocked on the glass door of his office. "Jack, general meeting in 5 minutes in the conference room. The new majority partner has arrived," she announced, with that tone of voice indicating that something important was about to happen. Jack sighed, saving the document on his computer. In the last 5 years working at that firm, he had witnessed several changes in the partnership, but this time it was different. Mr. Smith had sold 60% of his shares to an external investor, something unprecedented in the history of the firm that had always been family-owned. The conference room on the 12th floor had a privileged view of Fifth Avenue. The tempered glass windows framed the New York skyline like a moving picture, with its mirrored buildings reflecting the afternoon sun and the incessant traffic below. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, contrasting with the palpable tension that dominated the air-conditioned environment. Jack entered the room and greeted the colleagues who were already present. "Mr. Smith, A 65-year-old man with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses was visibly nervous, constantly adjusting his navy blue tie. The other partners, Mr. Johnson, a labour law specialist, and Ms. Thompson from the tax area, were whispering near the polished mahogany table. "Everyone, I want to introduce our new majority partner," said Mr. Smith, turning toward the door. "She will take over the executive direction of the firm starting today." The door opened, and Jack felt the world stop for a moment. The woman who entered the room was exactly the same one he had helped 3 weeks earlier in Brooklyn. She was wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal grey suit, her blonde hair styled in a sophisticated low bun, and she carried a brown leather portfolio, the same one that had spilled onto the wet sidewalk that rainy morning. Her green eyes scanned the room with professional confidence, momentarily stopping on Jack. For a fraction of a second, he sensed a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but she immediately resumed her cold and distant corporate demeanor. "Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Adams," she said, with a firm and articulate voice. "I have a master's degree in business law from NYU and 15 years of experience in legal management. I am here to modernize this firm and make it more competitive in today's market." Jack observed every movement she made as she spoke. Her hands, which he remembered trembling that morning, now held a PowerPoint presentation firmly. The vulnerability he had seen in her green eyes was replaced by an almost cold determination. "I know that changes can create insecurity," Victoria continued, clicking the remote to advance the slides on the LED screen mounted on the wall. "But I want to make it clear that I am here for us to grow together. I have ambitious plans for the next 2 years. Mr. Johnson, a robust 50-year-old man known for his frankness, raised his hand. "Ms. Adams, with all due respect, what kind of changes are we talking about? This firm has nearly 20 years of tradition." Victoria smiled, but Jack noticed it was a calculated smile, not genuine. "Excellent question, Mr. Johnson. First, we will implement new time and productivity management systems. Second, we will expand into more profitable areas like mergers and acquisitions. Third, we will establish clear monthly goals for each lawyer." The silence in the room was almost tangible. Jack could hear the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant roar of traffic on Fifth Avenue. He was torn between mentioning their previous encounter or respecting her apparent desire to maintain professional distance. "And what about working hours?" asked Miss Thompson, a 45-year-old woman who always prioritized the balance between personal and professional life. "We will implement extended hours when necessary. The legal market today demands total dedication," Victoria replied without hesitation. "Important clients do not respect business hours." Jack felt a tightening in his chest. His stomach churned. As a single father, his routine was meticulously calculated to pick up Emma from school, help her with homework, and ensure she received enough attention and affection. Extended hours would mean sacrificing precious moments with his daughter. "Miss Adams," Jack said, speaking for the first time, "I understand the need for growth, but some of us have family responsibilities that need to be considered." She looked directly at him, and for a moment Jack was sure she remembered him. There was something in her eyes that went beyond professional coldness, perhaps recognition, perhaps discomfort. "Mr. she asked, pretending not to know his name. "Jack Miller. I've worked here for 5 years in real estate law and contracts," he replied, maintaining a respectful yet firm tone. "Mr. Miller, I understand family concerns, but the market doesn't wait. Those who want to grow with us will find ways to adapt," she said, with a hardness in her voice that completely contrasted with the vulnerable woman he had helped. Mr. Smith tried to ease the tension. "Well, these are gradual changes. I'm sure we will all adapt. Ms. Adams has brought a solid growth proposal." The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, with Victoria presenting spreadsheets, goals, and new procedures. Jack noticed her hands trembled slightly when she picked up the glass of water, the same tremor he had noticed on the wet sidewalk. Behind the controlling facade, there were signs of nervousness that only he seemed to perceive. When the meeting ended, colleagues left the room, making low comments about the announced changes. Jack deliberately took his time organizing his papers, waiting for everyone to exit. Victoria also stayed behind, organizing her materials with overly precise movements, as if trying to maintain total control over every gesture. When they were alone in the room, the silence was deafening. The afternoon sun cast golden reflections on the windows, and the aroma of coffee had given way to the smell of cold air conditioning. Jack gathered his courage to break the silence. "It was you in Brooklyn 3 weeks ago, wasn't it?" he asked quietly. Victoria stopped organizing the papers and looked at him. For a few seconds her professional mask slipped, and he saw the vulnerability in those green eyes again. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Miller," she replied, but her voice didn't sound convincing. "The local market, the rain, the fainting. My daughter Emma was with me. You drank water and ate cookies she brought," Jack insisted, keeping his tone gentle. Victoria slammed the folder shut harder than necessary and turned to leave. "I think you're confusing people, Dr. Miller. I suggest you focus on the changes we will implement here." She left the room, leaving only the subtle scent of jasmine in the air, the same fragrance Jack had sensed that rainy morning. He stood alone, gazing at the city through the windows, feeling that his professional life had unexpectedly become complicated. The woman who had sparked his curiosity and kindness was now his boss, and apparently she was determined to pretend they had never met before. May brought drastic changes to the Smith & Associates office. Victoria wasted no time implementing her reforms, and the once familiar and welcoming atmosphere of the workplace transformed into something tense and competitive. Jack felt the weight of these changes every day, especially when he needed to leave promptly to pick up Emma from school. It was a typical Friday with autumn sunlight streaming through Jack's office windows when Carla appeared at his door with a worried expression. "Jack, Ms. Adams wants to speak with you." "Now," she said, lowering her voice. And by her tone, "It's not good news." Jack saved the document he was working on, a purchase and sale agreement due on Monday, and walked down the hall to the office that had once belonged to Mr. Smith. Victoria had completely redecorated the space. The old wooden desk was replaced by a modern glass and steel one. The shelves of legal books were replaced by files organized in a digital system, and ornamental plants were strategically placed to soften the coldness of the environment. "Mr. Miller, please take a seat," Victoria said without looking up from her computer screen. She wore a dark green blazer that accentuated her eyes, and her hair was down over her shoulders, a subtle change from the always impeccable bun of the first weeks. Jack sat in the black leather armchair in front of her desk, observing her hands typing with impressive speed. The strong aroma of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the jasmine scent he had learned to associate with her. "I need to discuss your productivity," she finally said, closing her laptop and looking directly at him. "I've received concerning reports about your departure times." "My departure times?" Jack repeated, feeling a growing irritation. "Ms. Adams, I fulfill my 8-hour workday and submit all my work on time." "But you leave every day exactly at 5:30, she replied, consulting a printed spreadsheet, "while other colleagues stay until 7 or 8 when necessary. That shows a lack of commitment." Jack took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. His hands involuntarily clenched, a sign of tension that Emma always noticed when he was nervous. "Ms. Adams, I have an 8-year-old daughter who needs to be picked up from school. My routine is calculated to give her the attention she deserves," he explained, keeping a professional tone despite his growing frustration. "I understand your family responsibilities, Mr. Miller, but this office is in a growth phase. We need people willing to dedicate themselves fully," she said, and Jack noticed something strange in her voice, as if the words weren't entirely her own. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked, deliberately using the formal address to mark the professional distance. Victoria hesitated for a moment, looking at her hands. Jack noticed she was fiddling with a pen, spinning it between her fingers. Jack fidgeted with his fingers, a nervous gesture that contrasted with the confidence he tried to project. "I'm suggesting flexibility. Hire a nanny, ask family for help, find alternatives. But your career cannot be limited by personal issues," she replied. But something in her eyes suggested she was uncomfortable with her own words. "Personal issues?" Jack repeated, now visibly irritated. "Ms. Adams, raising a child alone is not a personal issue. It's a responsibility I cannot completely outsource." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Jack could hear the distant hum of the air conditioning and the muffled sound of traffic on Fifth Avenue. Victoria watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was something beyond professional firmness, perhaps even admiration. "Mr. Jack," she finally said, her voice softer, "I'm not trying to undermine you, but I have pressures from the board, goals to meet. If we don't show productivity, we all suffer." It was the first time she had shown vulnerability since taking charge. Jack realized her words had an almost confessional tone, as if she were revealing something she shouldn't. "What kind of pressures?" he asked, genuinely curious. Victoria seemed to realize she had said more than she intended. She straightened in her chair, resuming her professional demeanor. "That's not relevant. What matters is that we need results. You have 2 weeks to adjust your schedule to the office's needs," she said, returning to an authoritative tone. "And what if I can't?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we'll have to re-evaluate your position here," she replied, avoiding looking him directly in the eye. Jack stood up, feeling a mix of anger and disappointment. The vulnerable woman he had helped in the rain seemed to have been completely replaced by this cold, calculating corporate version. "Ms. Adams, may I ask a personal question?" he said, stopping at the door. She looked at him, surprised. "Go ahead. Do you have children?" The question caught her off guard. Jack saw her hands tremble slightly before she tucked them under the table. "No, I don't," she replied after a pause. "Then perhaps you don't understand what it means to be responsible for shaping a child's character every day. Emma is not just my daughter, Ms. Adams. She is my absolute priority, and that won't change regardless of the pressures you may be facing," Jack said firmly. He left the room, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts. In the hallway, he waved at Carla and returned to his desk, but he couldn't focus on work. His mind was torn between irritation at the professional situation and a persistent curiosity about what was truly motivating Victoria's inflexible stance. At exactly 5:30, Jack shut down his computer and grabbed his jacket. While waiting for the elevator, he saw Victoria leaving her office with a folder in hand. Their eyes met for a moment, and he noticed something he hadn't before. She looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained. "Mr. Jack?" she called as the elevator doors opened. "Yes," he replied, keeping his foot in the door to prevent it from closing. "Your daughter, is she okay? I mean, since that day." "She hasn't had any more fainting spells or anything like that?" Victoria asked, and for the first time in weeks, her voice sounded genuinely concerned. Jack looked at her, confused. "Fainting spells? Ms. Adams, it was you who fainted that day in Brooklyn." Victoria turned red, realizing she had slipped. "I need to go," she said quickly, heading for the stairs. Jack stood in the elevator, processing what had just happened. She remembered the encounter perfectly. And more than that, she had been worried about Emma all these weeks. There was something much more complex going on with Victoria Adams than her professional facade let on. When he arrived at Emma's school, he found his daughter waiting in the yard, swinging her legs while sitting on the wooden bench where she always waited. "Dad, I thought you forgot about me," she said, running to hug him. "I would never forget you, Princess," Jack replied, hugging her tightly. "Sorry for the delay. I had a complicated conversation at work. With that pretty lady you saved in the rain? Emma asked with the insight that always surprised him. How do you know she works with me now? Jack asked, genuinely surprised. Because you get nervous, just like you did when Mom used to call before traveling? Emma replied simply. Jack stopped walking and looked at his daughter. Sometimes she showed an emotional wisdom that left him speechless. It was true that Victoria stirred in him a similar tension to what he felt with his ex-wife, but for completely different reasons. It's complicated, Emma, he finally said. Dad, you always say that complicated situations are just disguised opportunities, she replied, using his own words against him. Jack smiled, realizing that his 8-year-old daughter might have more clarity about the situation than he did. The last day of May fell on a sunny Friday, one of those days when New York showed its most welcoming face. The blue sky contrasted with the mirrored buildings of Fifth Avenue, and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of coffee and exhaust that characterized the city center. At Smith & Associates, the tension of the past weeks had created an almost unbearable atmosphere among the lawyers. Jack was finishing a report when Mr. Johnson appeared at his desk, wearing that characteristic smile of someone with an idea. Jack, how about that traditional Friday happy hour at Astor Bar? It's been a while since we went out to relax, suggested his colleague, adjusting his loosened tie after a long day at work. I don't know, Johnson. I need to pick up Emma. Jack started, but was interrupted. Come on, man. You've been tenser than a guitar string since the new boss arrived. Besides, I heard she's going too. Maybe it will be a good opportunity. It's a great opportunity to break the ice, Michael said, winking mischievously. Jack hesitated. The Corner Bar, located on Main Street, had been the traditional meeting spot for lawyers in the area for decades. A cozy place, with decor that mixed dark wood and warm lighting, where important deals were made over draft beer and appetizers. Just for an hour, Jack finally decided, picking up the phone to call the mother of one of Emma's classmates who had offered to look after the girl in emergencies. The Corner Bar was lively when they arrived. The ambient music, a mix of bossa nova and jazz, blended with the buzz of conversations and the characteristic sound of bottles and glasses. The aroma of fried appetizers and cold beer created a relaxed atmosphere that completely contrasted with the formal environment of the office. Jack ordered a beer and settled at a table near the polished wooden bar, watching as colleagues gradually arrived. Mr. Smith appeared accompanied by some important clients. Ms. Thompson came straight from court still wearing her robe, and other partner lawyers joined the group. It was when Victoria appeared at the entrance of the bar that Jack felt the atmosphere subtly shift. She had traded her formal suit for a sea-green silk blouse and black dress pants, her hair flowing over her shoulders. Without the rigid corporate look, she seemed younger and surprisingly more vulnerable. Wow, the boss out of work attire actually looks human, Michael commented quietly, earning an elbow from Jack. Victoria politely greeted the group and ordered a glass of red wine. Jack noticed she chose a table a bit away, as if she wanted to maintain professional distance even in this relaxed setting. Her hands held the glass with some tension, and she frequently glanced at her wristwatch. The evening went on with conversations about interesting cases, courtroom anecdotes, and the inevitable discussions about football that always enlivened the gatherings. Jack tried to focus on the conversation with his colleagues, but his eyes kept drifting to Victoria, who remained alone, observing the bar's activity with a thoughtful expression. After about an hour, when most colleagues had already said their goodbyes, Jack gathered his courage and approached her table. The bar had grown quieter, and the warm lighting created a more intimate atmosphere. "Miss Victoria, may I sit?" he asked, pointing to the empty chair in front of her. She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing the consequences. "Of course, Mr. Jack." He sat down, noticing that she had already had at least 2 glasses of wine, unusual for someone who seemed to maintain total control over everything. "Thank you for coming," she said unexpectedly. "I know the changes at the office have been Challenging. Challenging is a delicate way to say complicated, Jack replied with a half-smile, testing if she was open to a more frank conversation. Victoria smiled for the first time since she had taken over the office. It was a genuine smile that completely transformed her face, revealing small wrinkles around her eyes that indicated she actually smiled much more than she showed at work. "Mr. Jack," she said after a few moments of silence, swirling the glass between her fingers. "I remember that day in Brooklyn perfectly." Jack felt his heart race. "I figured you would. I pretended not to recognize you because, well, it's complicated," she continued, looking at the wine as if the right words were hidden in the red liquid. "Complicated how?" Jack encouraged, leaning slightly forward. Victoria took a deep breath, as if about to jump off a cliff. "I'm going through a very difficult divorce. My ex-husband is, let's say, a complicated person. When I took over the office, I decided I couldn't mix personal life with professional. It was safer to pretend we never met." Jack processed the information, finally understanding the calculated coldness of the first few weeks. "Safer for whom?" "For me. For you. For your job," she replied, finally looking him directly in the eye. "My ex-husband has a habit of sabotaging everything he sees as a threat to his distorted version of the facts." The ambient noise of the bar, low conversations, soft music, and the clinking of glasses created a bubble of intimacy around their table. Jack could smell jasmine mixed with the aroma of wine. "Victoria," he said, using her name for the first time, "can I ask a direct question?" She nodded, her green eyes fixed on his. "Why did you accept that help that morning, but now act like kindness is a weakness?" The question hit her like a punch. Jack saw her hands tremble slightly before she set the glass down on the table. "Because that day, I was vulnerable, and vulnerability is a luxury I can't afford in the position I hold now," she replied in a low voice. "You saw how the other partners look at me, how the staff questions every decision. If I show any weakness—" "Kindness isn't weakness," Jack gently interrupted, "and acknowledging that we need help is sometimes a sign of strength, not weakness." Victoria looked at him as if she was seeing something new in him. "Do you really believe that?" "I do. Emma has taught me that every day for the past 5 years," Jack replied sincerely. It was at that moment that his phone rang. The name Emma appeared on the screen, and he immediately answered, concerned. "Hi, Princess, is everything okay?" "Dad, it's really late. Did you forget about me?" came the worried voice of the girl on the other end of the line. Jack looked at his watch and realized it was already past 9 o'clock. "Sorry, sweetheart, Dad lost track of time. I'm on my way to get you." "It's okay, Dad. Lily's mum said I can have dinner here and sleep over if you want," Emma said, with that maturity that always surprised him. "No, sweetheart. Dad is coming. Love you." "I love you too, Dad." Jack hung up the phone. Jack looked at Victoria, who had been observing the entire conversation with an indescribable expression. "She's your absolute priority, isn't she?" Victoria asked softly. "She always will be," Jack confirmed, standing up to leave. "Jack," she called as he turned to walk away, "thank you for saving me that day, and I'm sorry for being so harsh with you at the office." He turned and looked at her. Her green eyes had an intensity that made him forget to breathe. "Victoria, you don't have to carry everything alone. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we can do." She smiled again, and Jack realized that this was the real woman behind the professional mask. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. Jack left the bar with the feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. The scent of jasmine seemed to cling to his clothes, mixed with the smell of the New York night and the sensation that his life was about to become even more complicated. But perhaps, for the first time in years, complicated in a good way. June arrived in New York, bringing with it the dry and cold weather characteristic of the city's winter. At Smith & Associates, the tradition of the annual summer party had remained intact, despite all the changes implemented by Victoria. The party would be held in the building's event hall on the 20th floor, with a panoramic view of the city stretching to the horizon. Jack was at his desk reviewing a commercial lease agreement when Carla appeared with a mischievous smile on her face. "Jack, you're taking Emma to the summer party tomorrow, right? She's at the age to enjoy these things," said the secretary, organizing some papers on her desk. "Of course I will. She's been so excited since she found out about the party. We even bought a country-style dress," Jack replied, smiling as he remembered his daughter's excitement when choosing a red and white checkered dress at the store. "And Miss Victoria has also confirmed her attendance. It'll be interesting to see her outside the formal office environment," Carla commented, watching Jack's reaction closely. Since the conversation at the corner bar the previous week, the dynamic between Jack and Victoria had subtly changed. She continued to maintain a professional demeanor during work hours, but occasionally he caught longer glances, discreet smiles, and a kindness that hadn't existed before. It was as if she was testing whether she could gradually let her guard down. On Saturday morning, Jack and Emma arrived at the office building around 3 in the afternoon. The event hall had been completely transformed. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling, wooden stalls simulated a rural environment, and the irresistible aroma of corn pudding, hot-spiced wine, and peanut candy filled the air. The decoration included corn balloons, sunflowers in clay pots, and even a small stage for dance performances. Emma was radiant in her country-style dress, with braids adorned with red ribbons and a small straw hat that Jack had bought especially for the occasion. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she took in all the decorations. "Dad, look how beautiful! There's even a fake campfire!" she exclaimed, pointing to the decorative setup that simulated a campfire with orange lights. "It really is, Princess, and look at all the food stalls," Jack said, guiding his daughter through the hall while greeting colleagues and their families. The atmosphere was lively, with country music playing on the sound system and children running between the stalls. Jack spotted Mr. Johnson dressed as a complete country character, with a straw hat, checkered shirt, and even a piece of cornstalk in his mouth, chatting animatedly with other colleagues. It was then that Emma tugged at his sleeve insistently, and Jack followed her gaze to see Victoria entering the hall. She had fully embraced the party theme, wearing a blue polka-dotted skirt, a white puff-sleeve blouse tied at the waist, and her blonde hair styled in 2 low braids adorned with blue ribbons. The casual and relaxed look made her appear at least 5 years younger. "Dad, it's her, the pretty lady you saved in the rain," Emma said too loudly, causing a few nearby people to look in their direction. "Emma, lower your voice," Jack requested, feeling his face heat up but unable to hide his smile at how charming Victoria looked in her country outfit. Victoria spotted them and walked toward them, looking a bit shy, a radical change from the confident demeanor she maintained at the office. "Hi, Mr. Jack, and this must be the famous Emma," said Victoria, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "You look beautiful in that country outfit." Emma beamed, clearly delighted by the attention. "Thank you. You look very pretty too. My dad said you're very elegant, but this way you seem more cooler." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, wondering why his 8-year-old daughter always chose the most inopportune moments for her insightful observations. "Emma," he began, but Victoria laughed, a genuine and relaxed laugh that Jack hadn't heard before. "She's adorable, Jack, and very honest," said Victoria, standing up. "Emma, can I ask you a question?" "Sure," the girl replied excitedly. "Did your dad really save me that rainy day?" Victoria asked with a playful smile. Emma took on a serious expression, as if she were testifying in court. "Yes, you fainted on the wet sidewalk, and my dad ran to help. I held the umbrella so you wouldn't get more wet, and then you got into a taxi and left." "And what did your dad say about that day?" Victoria continued, curious. "He was worried if you were okay. He asked me if I thought you were eating well, because people who faint like that might be sick," Emma recounted, making Victoria look surprised at Jack. "You were worried if I was eating well. Is that right?" Victoria asked, with a touched expression. Jack felt his face heat up even more. Emma tends to exaggerate stories. I don't exaggerate at all, Dad. You said that elegant women sometimes forget to eat because they get too worried about work, Emma retorted, crossing her arms. Victoria laughed again, and Jack noticed that she seemed genuinely relaxed for the first time since he met her. Your daughter is very observant, Jack, Victoria said, and he noticed she had used his name, not the formal Mr. Miller. Sometimes too observant, Jack murmured, but he was smiling. The party continued with the three of them exploring the stalls together. Emma insisted that Victoria try the corn pudding made by Mr. Smith's wife, and they had fun trying to fish rubber ducks at the game booth set up for the kids. It was during the traditional square dance that the most special moment happened. The party host was trying to form pairs for the dance, and Emma, with the typical subtlety of children, literally pushed Jack in Victoria's direction. You two dance together. I'm going to dance with Mr. Johnson, she announced, running to join the group of children. Jack and Victoria looked at each other, both a little embarrassed but smiling. The country music started, and they joined the circle of couples that had formed in the center of the hall. It's been a while since I danced the square dance, Victoria said, as they followed the caller's commands. Me too. The last time was at Emma's school fair last year, Jack replied, holding her hand during one of the choreographies. The smell of hot spice cider and sweet popcorn lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of jasmine from Victoria. As they danced, Jack could see the city of New York through the large windows of the hall, with its lights starting to turn on in the late afternoon. During a break between songs, Emma came running with 3 cups of hot spiced cider. I brought hot cider for you. The lady serving said it's a special family recipe, the girl said, handing over the cups. The 3 toasted, and Jack noticed that Victoria closed her eyes to savor the warm drink. Wow, it's been years since I had hot cider, she said, with a nostalgic expression. My grandmother made a similar one when I was a child. Did you play summer fair when you were little? Emma asked, curious. I did. My family was always very traditional with these celebrations. But after I grew up, with college and work, I ended up drifting away from those traditions, Victoria replied, with a slightly melancholic tone. That's a shame, Emma said sincerely. Summer fair is one of the best times of the year. There's delicious food, great music, and everyone is happy. Jack noticed that Victoria's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly disguised by drinking more hot cider. Emma is right. Sometimes we forget what is really important, Victoria said, looking at Jack in a way that made him understand she wasn't just talking about summer fairs. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly, with the 3 participating in games, eating peanut candy and corn pudding, and laughing at Mr. Johnson's jokes, who had become the official entertainer of the party. When the sun began to set and the city lights grew brighter through the windows, Emma started to yawn. Jack realized it was time to go home. I think it's time to take the princess home, he said to Victoria. It was so much fun, Emma said, spontaneously hugging Victoria. Can you come to the next parties too? Victoria returned the girl's hug tenderly, and Jack saw a maternal expression on her face that touched him deeply. If you invite me, I would love to come, Victoria replied, looking at Jack over Emma's head. Of course, Jack said without hesitation. You are part of our work group. As they said goodbye in the elevator, Emma gave Victoria a kiss on the cheek and said, Thank you for playing with us today. It was so much fun having you here. Victoria held the girl's hand for a moment and replied, Thank you for reminding me what I was missing. On the way home, Emma was chattering excitedly about the party in the back seat of the car. Dad, Victoria's really cool when she's not working, right? The girl commented. Yes, Princess. She's quite different when she's relaxed, Jack agreed. You like her, don't you, Dad? Emma asked with that straightforward honesty that always caught him off guard. Jack looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter, who was watching him expectantly. It's complicated, Emma. She's my boss at work. But that doesn't mean you can't be friends. Or more than friends, the girl said with a wisdom that surprised him for her 8 years. Jack smiled, realizing that his daughter had grasped in one afternoon what he had been trying to understand for weeks. Victoria was truly special when she let her guard down, and the connection between them was real. The summer fair had shown a side of her that work had hidden, and Jack found himself thinking that maybe it was worth risking the complications that a relationship with her could bring. July began with the typical dry cold of New York, but at Miller & Associates, the emotional temperature was about to heat up unexpectedly. Since the summer fair, Jack had noticed a subtle change in the dynamic with Victoria. She continued to maintain her professional demeanor, but there were moments, a discreet smile in the hallway, a warmer "good morning," small considerations about their schedules that indicated something was developing between them. It was a grey Tuesday when everything changed. Jack was at his desk, focused on drafting a petition for a client, when he heard raised voices coming from the reception area. Carla appeared at his door with a worried expression he rarely saw. "Jack, there's a man in reception asking for Ms. Victoria. He's her husband, and he's very agitated," Carla said in a low voice, but her tension was evident. Jack felt a knot in his stomach. Ex-husband, Carla. They're getting a divorce. Well, he doesn't seem very ex the way he's talking, Carla replied, nervously glancing toward the reception area. Jack stood up and walked down the hallway, where he could see the reception area. A tall man, well-dressed in an expensive navy suit, was animatedly gesturing to the receptionist. He had graying hair at the temples, an athletic build, and a commanding presence that screamed power and money. His deep voice echoed through the space, creating palpable discomfort. "Tell Victoria that Robert Adams is here, and he's not leaving without speaking to her," the man said, slamming his hand on the marble reception desk. It was at that moment that Victoria stepped out of her office, drawn by the noise. Jack saw her face pale as she spotted her ex-husband. Her hands, which she tried to hide by putting them in the pockets of her blazer, trembled visibly. "Robert, what are you doing here? We agreed that all communication would go through the lawyers," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady, but Jack could sense the nervousness behind her professional facade. "Oh, now you want to talk through lawyers? How convenient, considering you're surrounded by them here," Robert said with a sarcastic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about your little love escapades, dear." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack could feel that everyone in the office was paying attention to the conversation, even while pretending to work. The smell of coffee that always lingered in the air seemed to have been replaced by an almost tangible tension. "We have nothing to talk about, Robert, and I won't tolerate you causing a scene in my workplace," Victoria replied. But her voice came out louder than usual, revealing her agitation. "Your workplace? Oh, Victoria, you've always been good at fantasizing. Remember the money you used to buy those shares? Where did it come from again?" Robert said, deliberately raising his voice so everyone could hear. It was at that moment that Jack decided to intervene. His protective nature outweighed his prudence, and he approached the reception area with firm steps. "Excuse me," Jack said, stepping between Robert and Victoria. "You are disturbing the work environment. I ask that you leave." Robert looked him up and down, clearly assessing whether Jack posed any threat. There was something predatory in his gaze that made Jack stiffen his posture. "And who are you? Another one of my wife's playthings," Robert said disdainfully, deliberately using the possessive to provoke. "I'm Jack Miller, attorney at this firm. And Miss Victoria is right. If there are issues to be resolved, they should be handled through the proper channels," Jack replied, maintaining a professional but firm tone. Robert laughed cruelly. "How chivalrous! Victoria has always had a knack for manipulating decent men. Be careful, Doctor. She specializes in using others' vulnerabilities to get what she wants." Jack felt his anger rise, but he maintained his composure. "Sir, I will have to ask you once again to leave. Otherwise, I will have to call security." "That won't be necessary," Victoria said, finally regaining her voice. "Robert, you've said what you came to say. Now leave." Robert turned to her with a look that mixed anger and something that could be interpreted as obsession. "This isn't over, Victoria. You know very well what's at stake. And you, Doctor," he said, pointing at Jack, "watch the company you keep. Some women are more dangerous than they appear." With those words, Robert left the office, leaving behind an awkward silence and the echo of his veiled threats. Victoria stood still for a few seconds, as if processing what had just happened. Jack could see she was struggling to maintain her emotional control in front of the employees who were discreetly observing the situation. "Thank you," she said quietly, "just for Jack. But you didn't have to get involved." "I did," Jack replied without hesitation. "No one deserves to be humiliated in their own workplace." Victoria looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude and concern. "Jack, you don't understand. Robert is... He can make your life a living hell if he feels you're interfering in his." "Let him try," Jack said, and there was a determination in his voice that surprised even him. In the following days, the consequences of Robert's visit spread through the office like ripples in a pond. Jack began to notice speculative glances from colleagues, conversations that abruptly stopped when he approached, and whispered comments about his defense of Victoria. Mr. Johnson was the first to address the issue directly, appearing at Jack's desk on a Thursday afternoon with 2 cups of coffee. "Jack, can I speak to you frankly?" Mr. Johnson asked, sitting down in the chair across from the desk. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. What's up?" "People are talking about you and Miss Victoria after that scene with her ex-husband," Mr. Johnson began, pausing to choose his words carefully. "And what exactly are they saying?" Jack asked, although he already imagined the answer. "That you two are having an affair, that she's favoring you because of it, that the defense you made for her was very personal," Mr. Johnson explained, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Jack felt the weight of the situation. In a workplace, reputations were fragile, and rumors could destroy careers. "Mr. Johnson, there's nothing going on between us other than a respectful professional relationship," Jack said, technically being honest, as there really was nothing official between them. "I believe you, man. But Mr. Smith and some of the older partners are concerned. They think Miss Victoria might be, how can I put it, using feminine charm to gain allies," Mr. Johnson said, visibly embarrassed. The insinuation made Jack furious. "Mr. Johnson, you know my character. Do you really think I would be influenced by something that... Wouldn't it be professional competence? Not me, Jack. But you know how this industry is. Appearances matter, and that guy made it clear that he has information about how she managed to buy the shares of the firm." Jack fell silent, processing the information. He knew that Victoria had omitted details about her acquisition of the shares, but he hadn't imagined that it would become ammunition against her. That same afternoon, Victoria called him into her office. She looked tired, with dark circles that makeup couldn't completely hide. "Jack, we need to talk about what happened this week," she said, skipping formalities. "About the rumors," Jack asked directly. "About the consequences for you. Robert didn't make that scene by accident. He's trying to destabilize me professionally, and now he's using you for that," Victoria explained, with an honesty that he was still learning to appreciate. "Victoria, I'm adult enough to handle the consequences of my choices," Jack said, sitting in the chair in front of her desk. "But you have Emma to think about. Your career matters for her future," Victoria insisted, and Jack could see genuine concern in her green eyes. "My daughter also needs to learn that sometimes doing the right thing comes at a price, and standing up for someone who is being unjustly attacked is always the right thing," Jack replied with conviction. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and Jack saw something he hadn't seen before in her eyes, a deep admiration mixed with something that felt very much like affection. "Thank you," she said simply. but there was a world of meaning in that word. "Don't thank me yet," Jack said with a wry smile. "I think this is going to get a lot more complicated before it gets better." He had no idea how prophetic that statement would turn out to be. August arrived in New York with its characteristic chill, and with it came revelations that would further shake the already tense situation at Smith & Associates. The morning of a grey Monday brought with it a discovery that Jack had never imagined. He was reviewing contracts at his desk when Mr. Smith appeared at his door with a serious expression he rarely showed. The 65-year-old man, always elegant in his impeccable suits, looked visibly disturbed. "Jack, can I speak with you privately?" asked the senior partner, closing the glass door behind him. "Of course, sir. What happened?" Jack replied, gesturing for him to sit down. Mr. Smith remained standing, nervously pacing the small room. The aroma of morning coffee that always lingered in the office seemed more bitter that morning. "Jack, I've received some delicate information about our majority partner," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Information that you might need to know, considering the rumors that have been circulating." Jack felt a knot in his stomach. "What kind of information?" "About how she really got the money to buy the shares of the firm," Mr. Smith said, finally sitting down and looking Jack directly in the eye. "It wasn't professional merit as she implied. It was family inheritance." "Family inheritance," Jack repeated, trying to process the information. "Her family has a logistics company in the countryside. When her father passed away last year, she inherited a considerable sum. It was that money she used to buy her stake here," Mr. Smith explained, watching Jack's reaction closely. Jack fell silent for a few moments. He remembered how he had admired Victoria's determination and competence, believing she had earned her position purely on merit. The discovery that she had omitted this crucial information made him question what else she hadn't revealed. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Smith?" Jack finally asked. "Because you've been putting yourself out there to defend her, Jack. And I think you deserve to know who you're dealing with," the senior partner replied, with an almost paternal tone. "Moreover, there are other complications coming." "What complications?" "Your mother called yesterday. She said she's coming to spend a few days with you. She'll arrive on Thursday," Mr. Smith said, completely changing the subject in a way that confused Jack. Jack frowned. "Mr. Smith, with all due respect, I don't understand the connection between my mother and—" "Jack, your mother is a very traditional woman, and she has very strong opinions about women in positions of power," Mr. Smith explained with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought you should be prepared." On Thursday, as promised, Mrs. Carmen Miller arrived in New York from Springfield. At 62, she was a strong-willed woman, her grey hair always impeccably styled, and she had defined opinions on practically everything. Jack picked her up at the bus station, and Emma was beaming with joy in the back seat of the car. "Grandma Carmen, are you going to sleep in my room with me?" Emma asked excitedly, hugging her grandmother as soon as she got into the car. "Of course, my beautiful granddaughter. I brought a bunch of sweets from Springfield for you," Mrs. Carmen replied, returning the hug with affection, but casting a scrutinizing look at Jack. "And how is my son? Working too much as always?" "I'm fine, Mom. A bit busy at the office, but nothing too serious," Jack replied, avoiding mentioning the recent complications. During dinner, Emma couldn't stop talking about the summer fair and about the pretty lady that Daddy saved in the rain. Mrs. Carmen listened intently, and Jack could see the gears turning in his mother's sharp mind. "And where does this pretty lady work, Emma?" Mrs. Carmen asked, serving more rice to her granddaughter. "At the same place Daddy works. She's his boss now," Emma replied innocently, unaware of the expression forming on her grandmother's face. "Boss?" Mrs. Carmen repeated, staring intently at Jack. "How interesting." That night, after Emma went to bed, Mrs. Carmen wasted no time expressing her concerns to her son. "Jack, I need to talk to you about this situation at your work," she said. pouring fennel tea in the kitchen while the low sound of the television came from the living room. "What situation, Mom?" "What's going on, Jack?" Mrs. Carmen Miller asked, although she already suspected the direction of the conversation. "This story about you being involved with your boss. Emma may be a child, but she sees everything. And from the way she talks, there's something happening between you two," Mrs. Carmen said, with the typical frankness of mothers. Jack sighed. "Mom, there's nothing going on. Victoria is a co-worker who went through a tough situation, and I helped her. That's all." "Victoria? Nice name," Mrs. Carmen replied, but her tone suggested that pretty names didn't impress her much. "Is she divorced?" "She's getting divorced, Mom. Why does that matter?" Mrs. Carmen looked at him with that expression all mothers develop, half exasperation, half maternal concern. "Jack, dear, divorced women in positions of power are complicated. They have emotional baggage, unresolved issues, and you have Emma to think about." "Mom, you're being prejudiced," Jack said, feeling a growing irritation. "I'm not being prejudiced. I'm being realistic. Women who prioritize their careers above all are not suitable for families." "They don't understand the importance of domestic stability," insisted Mrs. Carmen, crossing her arms. The discussion was interrupted by Jack's phone ringing. It was Victoria. "Jack? Sorry for calling so late, but there's been an emergency with the construction client. I need you to come to the office now," she said, urgency in her voice. Jack looked at the clock. It was 10 at night. "Now? Victoria, my mum is visiting." "I know, and I'm really sorry. But the client is threatening to cancel the contract if we don't resolve this legal issue today. It's about that lot in the South Side," she explained, and Jack could hear the disguised desperation in her voice. Mrs. Carmen watched the conversation with an increasingly disapproving expression. "All right, I'll go. I just need to find someone to stay with Emma," Jack said. "I'll stay with her, of course," Mrs. Carmen said loudly enough for Victoria to hear. "Go take care of your boss, Jack." "Nice." When Jack hung up, Mrs. Carmen wasted no time expressing her opinion. "You see, 10 at night on a Thursday, and she calls you to work. What kind of woman does that to a family man?" she said, shaking her head in disapproval. "Mom, emergencies happen. It's part of the job," Jack defended, grabbing his car keys. "Jack, when did your ex-wife start calling you for emergencies on weekends and holidays? Remember how that ended?" Mrs. Carmen said, hitting where it hurt the most. Jack paused at the door, feeling the weight of his mother's words. It was true that Melissa had started demanding more of his time before leaving the family to pursue her artistic career. At the office, Jack found Victoria clearly stressed, surrounded by papers and several empty coffee cups on the table. Her hair was messy, and she had taken off her blazer, working only in her silk blouse that revealed her tense shoulders. "Thank you for coming, Jack." "I know it was inconvenient," she said, avoiding looking him directly in the eye. "What exactly is the emergency?" Jack asked, sitting down to analyze the documents. As they worked on the issue, which was indeed urgent and complex, Jack noticed something that bothered him. Victoria displayed detailed knowledge about financial and legal aspects that went far beyond what she had revealed about her experience. Her suggestions were too sophisticated for someone who had omitted the source of her funds. "Victoria," Jack said during a pause, "can I ask you a direct question?" She looked at him nervously. "Sure. Why didn't you mention that you used family inheritance to buy the office shares?" he asked, watching her reaction closely. Victoria's face paled, and she dropped the pen she was holding. Who told you that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Does it matter? What matters is that you let me believe you earned everything on your own merit," Jack replied, feeling a disappointment he hadn't expected. Victoria fell silent for a long moment, nervously fiddling with the papers on the table. "Jack, I didn't exactly lie. I just didn't think it was relevant to mention the source of the money," she finally said. "Didn't think it was relevant?" "Victoria, I admired your determination, your struggle to get where you are. I'm now discovering that a significant part of that was facilitated by inheritance, Jack said, unable to hide his irritation. And does that diminish my professional competence? Does it diminish my knowledge, my experience? Victoria shot back, with a defensiveness Jack had rarely seen. No, but it diminishes my trust in your honesty, Jack replied, and he saw that his words hit her like a punch. They finished the work in tense silence, resolving the client's legal issue, but creating an emotional chasm between them. When Jack got home, it was almost 2 in the morning. Mrs. Carman was waiting for him in the living room, with an expression that mixed maternal concern and an "I told you so" that she didn't need to verbalize. "How was the emergency?" she asked, carrying irony in her voice. "Complicated, Mum." "Very complicated," Jack replied, and for the first time since Victoria had entered his life, he began to question whether his mother was right about some things. The following week would be even more challenging, testing not only his professional relationship with Victoria, but also his own convictions about love, trust, and the choices he made as a single father. The end of September brought those uncertain days between winter and spring to New York, with cold mornings giving way to surprisingly warm afternoons. At Smith & Associates, the tension between Jack and Victoria had become palpable since the revelation about the inheritance. They maintained a cold professional cordiality, avoiding conversations that weren't strictly necessary for work. It was a Monday when Jack received the call that would change everything again. "Mr. Jack, this is from Emma's school. You need to come pick her up urgently," said the worried voice of the academic coordinator. Jack's heart raced. "What happened? Did she get hurt?" "She didn't get hurt, but she's feeling very unwell. Intense headaches and—" Jack felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "We think it's best if you take her to the doctor," the coordinator explained. He dropped everything at the office and rushed to the school. He found Emma pale and visibly weakened in the nurse's office, lying on a small stretcher with a cold compress on her forehead. Her normally bright brown eyes were dull and tired. "Hi, Dad," she said weakly when she saw him. "My head hurts a lot." "It's okay, Princess. Daddy will take you to the doctor," Jack said, carrying her in his arms to the car, feeling how much lighter she seemed than usual. At the hospital, after a series of tests that felt like they lasted forever, Dr. Smith, Emma's pediatrician since she was a baby, called Jack for a private conversation in his office. "Jack, I need to talk to you about the results," the doctor said, a 50-year-old man with grey hair and reading glasses, gesturing for Jack to sit in one of the brown leather chairs. "Is it serious, Doctor?" Jack asked, feeling the world stop around him. "Emma is developing a case of chronic migraines, possibly triggered by stress. It's not something that puts her life at risk, but it will require regular medical follow-ups and some lifestyle changes," Dr. Smith explained, consulting the tests. Jack breathed a sigh of relief, but remained worried. Stress? But she's just a child. What could be causing stress? Children are more sensitive to family tensions than we realize. Changes in routine, conflicts, emotional instability of parents. All of this can manifest physically, the doctor said kindly but directly. Jack felt a heavy weight on his chest. In recent months, between changes at work, conflicts with Victoria, and his mother's tense visit, he had tried to shield Emma from everything, but apparently he had failed. "What do I need to do?" Jack asked. "Bi-weekly appointments with me, some follow-up tests, specific medication for the episodes, and most importantly, emotional stability at home. Emma needs to feel safe and loved," Dr. Smith explained. "Doctor, I work in a law firm. The hours are incomplicated. Can I get some sort of medical note to justify leaving early when necessary?" Jack asked, already anticipating the conflicts this would cause. "Of course. I'll prepare a complete medical report. Emma's health must be the top priority," the doctor replied. The next morning, Jack arrived at the office with the medical report in hand and a steely determination. He went straight to Victoria's office, where she was on the phone discussing a contract with a client. She gestured for him to wait, but Jack simply placed the report on her desk and sat down. Victoria finished the call, visibly irritated by the interruption. "Jack, I was on an important call," she began, but stopped when she saw his expression. "My daughter is sick," Jack said simply, pushing the report toward her. "She needs regular medical follow-ups. This means I will have to leave early at least twice a month, and possibly miss work when she has episodes." Victoria picked up the report and read it quickly, her expression changing as she processed the information. Jack noticed her hands tremble slightly as she read about Emma's diagnosis. "Jack, I didn't know," she said in a softer voice, the professional coldness giving way to genuine concern. "How is she feeling?" "Scared, in pain, and apparently stressed by tensions I thought I was hiding from her," Jack replied, unable to disguise the guilt in his voice. Victoria was silent for a few moments, rereading the report. Jack could see an internal conflict unfolding in her green eyes, the struggle between her responsibilities as a boss and her personal feelings. "Of course you can adjust your hours as needed," she finally said. "Emma's health is much more important than any productivity goal." Jack looked at her in surprise. He had expected resistance, arguments about professional commitments, pressures from the board. "So, it's that simple?" he asked. "Jack, I'm not a monster," Victoria said, and there was real pain in her voice. "I know you must have a terrible opinion of me after the inheritance issue, but I would never prioritize work goals over a child's health." The silence that followed was different from the cold tension of the past weeks. There was something more vulnerable, more human in the atmosphere of the room. "Victoria," Jack said after a few moments, "can I tell you something?" She nodded, putting the medical report in a folder. "The night you called me for that emergency, my mother made a comment about women who prioritize their careers over family. I defended her, but a part of me kept wondering if she was right." Victoria looked at him with an expression that mixed hurt and understanding. "And now, do you still think your mother was right?" Jack thought carefully before responding. "Now I think I judged you based on my own insecurities. Emma developed stress, not because you're a demanding boss, but because I was stressed about the whole situation, and she sensed it." "Jack," Victoria began, but he interrupted her. "Let me finish. About the inheritance, you were right. It doesn't diminish your professional competence. And you weren't obligated to tell me about your personal financial life. I reacted poorly because I felt deceived, but in reality, I just felt inadequate." Victoria stood up and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Outside, the typical Tuesday bustle created its urban symphony of horns, engines, and voices. "Jack, can I tell you why I didn't mention the inheritance?" she said without turning around. "Of course. Because my entire professional life, whenever people found out my family had money, they stopped taking me seriously. They thought I was playing lawyer, that I didn't really need to work. I wanted to be respected for my knowledge, not judged by my bank account," she explained, and Jack could hear the accumulated frustration of years in her voice. "And I did exactly what you feared I would do," Jack said, feeling even worse. Victoria turned to him, and for the first time in weeks, there was something beyond professional coldness in her eyes. "Jack, can I be honest with you about something?" "Sure. Since that day in the rain, since the summer fair, since our conversation at the bar, I have feelings for you that go beyond professional respect," she said, and Jack saw how difficult it was for her to admit that. "But I'm afraid that anything that happens between us will hurt you, and consequently Emma." Jack felt his heart race. Finally, the total honesty he didn't know he needed to hear. "Victoria, can I ask you a question that might be inappropriate considering you're my boss?" he said. She smiled, the first genuine smile directed at him in weeks. "You can ask. Would you like to meet Emma outside of work? Like, as someone important in my life, not as my boss?" The question caught her off guard. Jack saw her hands tremble slightly before she hid them behind her back. "Jack, that would complicate things a lot," she began. "It would. But maybe some complications are worth it," Jack said, standing up and walking over to where she was by the window. "Emma has been asking about you since the summer fair, and honestly, I've been thinking a lot about you too." Victoria looked him in the eyes, and Jack saw the internal struggle she was having between caution and desire. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "we have to establish clear rules about how to separate personal from professional life, and Emma has to always be the priority." "Always," Jack agreed without hesitation. "And your mother will probably hate me," Victoria added with a wry smile. "My mother already hates me for half of my life decisions." "One more won't make a difference," Jack replied, making her laugh. That afternoon, Jack left early to pick up Emma from her follow-up appointment with Dr. Smith. On the way home, he told his daughter about the conversation with Victoria. "Dad, are you going to date Victoria?" Emma asked directly, as always. "I don't know yet, Princess. First, we want you to get to know her better outside of work. What do you think about that?" Emma thought for a few moments. "Dad, she's nice and was sweet to me at the fair. But what, sweetheart? You're not going to get so busy that you'll forget about me, right?" she asked, with a vulnerability that broke Jack's heart. Jack stopped the car and turned to look his daughter in the eyes. "Emma, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. Nothing and no one in the world will ever be more important to me than you. You are my daughter, my priority, my most important love. That will never change, no matter what happens." Emma smiled, the first time he had seen her truly relaxed since the diagnosis. "Then it's okay, Dad. If you like her and she's nice to me, I want to get to know her better too." Jack hugged his daughter, realizing that maybe, finally, the pieces of his life were starting to come together in a way that made sense for everyone involved. October arrived in New York, bringing with it the first warmer mornings and the scent of blooming jacarandas throughout the city. At Smith & Associates, the relationship between Jack and Victoria had found a delicate balance, professional during working hours, but with a growing intimacy revealed in lingering glances, discreet smiles, and a connection that did not go unnoticed by the more observant colleagues. Emma was adapting well to the treatment for her migraines, and the bi-weekly appointments with Dr. Smith showed progressive improvement. Victoria had become a frequent presence on the family's weekends, always respectful of the father-daughter routine, but clearly winning Emma's genuine affection. It was on a Monday morning that everything fell apart again. Jack was reviewing a purchase and sale agreement when his phone rang. It was Mr. Johnson, but his voice was tense in a way Jack rarely heard. "Jack, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come to my office and bring all the files of your main clients from the last 6 months?" Mr. Johnson said, with a tone that made Jack feel a knot in his stomach. "What happened, Michael?" Jack asked, already starting to organize the requested files. "I'd rather explain in person." "It's complicated," Mr. Johnson replied before hanging up. In Mr. Johnson's office, Jack also found Mr. Smith and Ms. Thompson. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and all the faces showed concern. On the table, there was a pile of documents and several printed emails. "Jack, have a seat," Mr. Smith said, gesturing to a chair. "We have a serious problem." "What kind of problem?" Jack asked, feeling anxiety rise. "Some of your main clients have received anonymous calls in the past few weeks," Mr. Johnson began. "Someone is spreading information about alleged irregularities in the office, questioning our credibility and specifically mentioning conflicts of interest involving you and Ms. Victoria." Jack felt his blood run cold. "What kind of information?" Ms. Thompson picked up one of the printouts. "According to the client from Adams Construction, someone called suggesting that your legal decisions are being influenced by a personal relationship with the majority partner. They insinuated that you might be favoring her interests at the expense of the client's." "That's absurd," Jack said, feeling anger rise. All my opinions are based strictly on technical and legal criteria. We know that, Jack, Mr. Smith said gently. But public perception is important, and whoever is making these calls has very specific information about the internal dynamics of the office. Jack processed the information, and a suspicion began to form in his mind. Do you think it's Victoria's ex-husband? Robert Adams has contacts in the business world and personal reasons to want to harm both her and anyone close to her, he confirmed. Mr. Johnson, and the information is too precise to be a coincidence. At that moment, Victoria appeared at the door of the room. Her expression changed immediately when she saw the meeting in progress. Can I know what's going on? She asked, adopting that professional stance she took when she felt her authority was being questioned. Mr. Smith gestured for her to sit down and explained the situation. Jack observed Victoria's face progressively pale as the details were revealed. Robert, she said simply when the explanation ended, he said it wasn't over. I just didn't think it would come to this. Victoria, what other information could he have about the office operations? Ms. Thompson asked. Victoria hesitated, looking at Jack before answering. During our marriage, I would mention work at home. He knows about processes, clients, even personal issues of the employees that I mentioned casually. Jack felt a mix of anger and concern. Victoria, does this mean he could use confidential information against any of us? Potentially, yes, she admitted, visibly distressed. Jack, I'm so sorry. I never imagined he would use this information to harm you. Mr. Smith leaned forward. Victoria, we need to know. What specific information does he have about Jack? Victoria turned red. When he started to suspect there was something between us, he hired a private investigator. He has pictures of you together in the park with Emma, at the movies, on weekends, and he knows about Emma's medical condition. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack felt as if cold water had been thrown over him. He has pictures of my daughter, Jack asked, his voice dangerously low. Jack, they're not compromising photos. They're just evidence that you're spending time together as a family. Victoria tried to explain, but she could see the fury growing in his eyes. Jack stood up abruptly. Victoria, you knew about this and didn't tell me. I found out last weekend. Robert called me making threats. I was trying to figure out a way to handle this without involving you further, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Without involving me? Victoria, he's using my daughter as leverage. How does that not involve me? Jack said, raising his voice for the first time since they met. Mr. Johnson tried to mediate. Let's take it easy. What exactly is the threat he's making, Victoria? Victoria took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. He said that if I don't resign from the partnership and go back to him, he will use the information about my relationship with Jack to destroy his professional reputation, and he will question in court Jack's ability to adequately care for Emma, using the photos and the medical report as evidence that the child is being exposed to stressful situations. The silence returned to dominate the room, but this time it was charged with a tension that felt physical. Jack sat down slowly, processing the magnitude of the threats. Can he do this legally? Jack asked Mr. Smith. Unfortunately, yes. With a good lawyer and the right evidence, he can challenge custody. He may not succeed, but the process itself would be traumatic for Emma and devastating for your reputation. Mr. Smith replied with regret. Jack looked at Victoria, who was clearly struggling to maintain her composure. Her green eyes were filled with unshed tears, and her hands were visibly trembling. Victoria, Jack said in a controlled but cold voice, why didn't you tell me about this last weekend? Because I knew you would do exactly what you're doing now. Blame yourself and try to protect me by putting your own life at risk, she replied with brutal honesty. My life is already at risk, and so is my daughter's, Jack retorted. You didn't have the right to make that decision for me. Victoria stood up, discreetly wiping her eyes. You're right. I brought this problem to all of you. The solution is obvious." "What solution?" Ms. Thompson asked. "I resign from the partnership. I sell my shares back to you and step away completely." "Robert will have no reason to pursue anyone here," Victoria said, with a determination that sounded almost like desperation. "Victoria, no," Jack said immediately. "We're not going to let him win this way. Jack, you have Emma to think about." "I won't let my personal problems destroy your lives," Victoria insisted. Mr. Smith intervened. "Let's take it easy. We don't need to make hasty decisions. There may be other ways to handle this situation." What other ways?" Jack asked, but his tone indicated skepticism. "Let's investigate Robert. If he's using confidential information obtained during the marriage to harm others, that could constitute a crime. And if he hired someone to photograph a child without parental consent, that could also have legal implications," Mr. Johnson suggested. Jack looked at Victoria, who seemed exhausted from the emotional tension. Part of him wanted to protect her, to fight alongside her against the threats from her ex-husband. Another part, the part that was a father above all, was terrified of the possibility of Emma being harmed by this personal war. "I need to think," Jack finally said. "I need to process all of this and decide what the best way to protect my daughter is." "Jack," Victoria began, but he interrupted her. "Victoria, I need some time. This is much bigger than I imagined, and Emma has to be my priority." He left the room, leaving Victoria with the other partners, carrying the weight of a decision that could determine not only her professional future, but also her personal one. In the hallway, he stopped in front of the window overlooking Main Street and wondered how a story that had started with a simple act of kindness on a rainy morning had become so complicated. That afternoon, when picking up Emma from school, Jack watched his daughter playing in the yard with her classmates, laughing unconcernedly. The innocence of that moment led him to make a decision that would change everything. He would not allow anyone, not even someone learning to love, to jeopardize the safety and happiness of his daughter. The war against Robert Adams was just beginning. The 2 weeks following the discovery of Robert's threats were the most tense in the history of Smith and Associates. Jack had plunged into a meticulous investigation of Beatrice's ex-husband, working late into the night and using all his legal knowledge to find a way to neutralize the threats without putting Emma at risk. Beatrice, in turn, had become a shadow of her former self. She maintained a professional demeanor during office hours, but Jack could see the weight of guilt and worry consuming her from within. Her once bright green eyes, filled with determination, now carried a sadness she tried to hide behind forced smiles. It was a Friday at the end of October when Jack finally had the answer he was looking for. He had spent the entire week gathering information, discreetly talking to other lawyers who had dealt with Robert in the past, and uncovering details about his questionable business practices. That morning, Jack requested an urgent meeting with all the partners. The conference room overlooked Main Street, where the jacaranda trees were in full bloom, creating vibrant purple patches that contrasted with the grey of the buildings. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, but the tension was almost palpable. "I found our solution," Jack announced as everyone took their seats, placing a thick folder on the polished mahogany table. Beatrice looked at him with a mix of hope and apprehension. She wore a navy blue blazer that accentuated her eyes, but Jack could see the dark circles that makeup couldn't completely conceal. "What kind of solution?" asked Mr. Smith, adjusting his glasses to examine the documents Jack had spread across the table. "Robert Adams has a much bigger problem than we thought," Jack said, pointing to a series of documents. "For the past 3 years, he has been using insider information obtained through the wives and ex-wives of lawyers to manipulate bids and government contracts." Mr. Johnson picked up one of the documents, examining it closely. "How did you find this out?" "I spoke with Mr. Carvalho from Silva and Associates. His ex-wife was also married to Robert before Beatrice. She passed along information about bidding processes that resulted in million-dollar contracts for Robert's companies, Jack explained, feeling the adrenaline of the discovery. Beatrice paled. Jack, does this mean that... It means you weren't the first, and probably wouldn't be the last. Robert has a pattern. He marries successful women in the legal field, obtains insider information, and when the relationship sours, he uses blackmail to keep them under control, Jack continued, observing the shock on Beatrice's face. Miss Thompson leaned forward. Do you have concrete evidence of this? Jack smiled for the first time in weeks, a smile that didn't reach his eyes but showed satisfaction. I do, and more. I discovered that he is being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion. His companies have several irregularities that could lead to criminal charges. And how does this help us? Beatrice asked, her voice almost inaudible. Jack looked her directly in the eyes. Because now we have ammunition for a counterattack. Robert may have information on us, but we have evidence of crimes he committed. Mr. Smith leaned back in his chair, processing the information. Jack, are you suggesting we blackmail the blackmailer? I'm suggesting we use the law to our advantage. Let's approach the district attorney with this evidence. When Robert is busy defending himself against criminal charges, he won't have the time or energy to pursue us, Jack explained. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was a silence of budding hope, of real possibilities materializing. Beatrice stood up and walked to the window, watching the activity on Main Street. Jack could see she was struggling with conflicting emotions. Jack, she said without turning around, why are you doing this? It would be much simpler to let me resign and walk away. Jack also stood up and went to where she was. The other partners discreetly began organizing the papers, giving them a moment of relative privacy. Because it would be unfair, Jack said simply. You don't deserve to have your life destroyed by a manipulative and controlling man, and because... Because what? Beatrice asked, turning to face him. Because I fell in love with you, Beatrice. With the woman I saved in the rain, with the competent professional, with the caring person who won my daughter's heart, and the people we love are not abandoned when things get tough. Beatrice fell silent, her hands trembling slightly. Jack saw tears welling up in her green eyes. Jack, if we stay together, there will always be complications. Robert is not the type to give up easily, and I have much more emotional baggage than you can imagine, she said, her voice trembling. And I have an 8-year-old daughter prone to stress-induced migraines, a demanding job, an overprotective mother, and an ex-wife who might show up at any moment wanting to reconnect, Jack replied with a smile. If we waited for our lives to be perfect to be together, we would die alone. Beatrice laughed through her tears, the first genuine sound of joy Jack had heard from her in weeks. Mr. Jack, Ms. Beatrice, Mr. Smith diplomatically interrupted, we need to decide how to proceed with this information. They returned to the table, and for the next 2 hours they outlined a detailed strategy. Mr. Johnson would be responsible for making the first contact with the district attorney. Ms. Thompson would coordinate the legal protection of the firm in case Robert attempted retaliation. Mr. Smith would use his contacts at the Bar Association to ensure that any ethical complaints were handled with due consideration. Jack would be responsible for compiling all the evidence and preparing a complete dossier on the... Jack looked at Miss Victoria. There was so much left unsaid between them, so many words that needed to be spoken. Let's handle this outside of work, Ms. Victoria finally said. First, we neutralize Robert's threats. Then we can talk about how to balance our personal and professional lives in an ethical and transparent way. I agree, Jack said, but I want to make it clear to everyone. My priority will always be Emma. Any decision we make has to be good for her too. Mr. Johnson smiled. Jack, from what I saw at the summer fair, your daughter completely approves of Ms. Victoria. Sometimes kids see things more clearly than adults do. That afternoon, Jack left early to pick up Emma from school. On the way, he called Mr. Smith to schedule a routine checkup and took the opportunity to ask about the progress of her treatment. "Emma is adapting very well to the medication, Jack, and the episodes of stress have decreased considerably in the last 2 weeks. What has changed at home?" the doctor asked. Jack thought about the question. "I think I stopped trying to protect her from everything and started including her in conversations about changes in our lives. She feels more secure when she understands what's happening." "Exactly. Kids her age are more resilient than we think, as long as they feel loved and included," confirmed Mr. Smith. At school, Emma was waiting for him in the yard with a drawing in her hand. It was a picture of 3 people holding hands: her, Jack, and a blonde female figure that clearly represented Miss Victoria. "Who is the drawing for, Princess?" Jack asked, although he already knew the answer. "For Miss Victoria. She seems sad lately, and drawings always make me happy when I'm sad," Emma replied with the simple wisdom of children. "Do you want to give the drawing to her now?" "She's in the office," Jack suggested. "Can I? Really?" Emma asked excitedly. In the office, Emma handed the drawing to Miss Victoria, who was organizing papers on her desk. Jack watched the transformation on Miss Victoria's face when she saw the drawing. Sadness gave way to genuine and touching joy. "Emma, it's beautiful. Can I put it on my desk?" Miss Victoria asked, kneeling down to the girl's height. "Of course. And when you feel sad, you can look at the drawing and remember that Daddy and I love you very much," Emma said, hugging Miss Victoria spontaneously. Jack saw Miss Victoria close her eyes for a moment, as if she were recording that hug in her memory. "Miss Victoria," Emma said, pulling away from the hug, "do you want to have dinner with us tonight? Daddy is going to make pasta and I can show you my room." Miss Victoria looked at Jack, who nodded encouragingly. "I would love to have dinner with you, Ms. Victoria replied, and Jack realized she had made an important decision, not just about dinner, but about fighting for the future they all wanted to build together. That night, while Emma slept in her room with the drawing she made for Miss Victoria taped to the wall, Jack and Miss Victoria talked in the living room about the future. Not just about Robert's threats, which would soon be neutralized, but about how to build a relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine love. "Jack," Miss Victoria said, nestled in his arms on the couch, "are you sure it's worth taking all these risks for me?" "Miss Victoria, 3 months ago I was a man who had given up on believing in romantic love. You reminded me that it's possible to find someone who completes us, who loves our family, who's willing to fight for the same values we do." "Of course, it's worth it," Jack replied, kissing the top of her head. "And what if we discover other complications along the way?" she asked. "Then we will face them together, because that's what people who love each other do. They weather the storms together and celebrate the sunshine that comes afterward," Jack said. Outside, New York continued its nighttime rhythm. Cars passing by, people heading home, life following its natural course. But inside that apartment in Brooklyn, a new family was forming, based not only on passion, but on conscious choices, shared values, and the determination to build something lasting and beautiful. The story that had begun with a fainting spell on a rainy morning was transforming into something much greater, a lesson on how true love is not just a feeling, but a daily decision to choose to stay, to fight, and to grow together, especially when things get complicated.